Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, working harder than everyone around you, yet somehow you're still falling behind? You arrive first, you leave last. You sacrifice sleep, weekends, time with people you love, and still, the results don't come. Meanwhile, someone else works fewer hours, looks calmer, and somehow keeps winning. That gap between effort and outcome starts to eat at you, quietly, relentlessly, and one day, you begin to wonder something dangerous. What if hard work isn't enough? If you've ever felt exhausted but unsuccessful, if you've ever believed that suffering was the price of success, stay with me, subscribe to the channel. Because this story isn't about quitting. It's about learning how to win without breaking yourself. And by the end, you may never look at effort the same way again. In a quiet farming valley where families had worked the same land for generations, there lived a man named Thomas. Thomas was 32 years old. He owned a modest 10-acre farm passed down from his father, and before that, his grandfather. And Thomas believed in one thing above all else: hard work. He believed it was the purest form of honesty, the only real path to success, the measure of a man's worth. Every morning, Thomas woke before the sun touched the horizon. 4 a.m., sometimes earlier. While the rest of the valley slept, Thomas was already in the fields. He refused modern tools, refused shortcuts, refused anything that looked like an easy way. "My grandfather did it this way," he would say. "Hard work never fails." He planted every seed by hand, watered every row with buckets, pulled every weed himself. From sunrise to sunset, Thomas worked. His hands were calloused and cracked. His back ached constantly, but he wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. At night, he collapsed into bed, too tired to eat properly, too tired to talk, too tired to live. His wife, Sarah, would sit beside him and say quietly, "Thomas, you're killing yourself. There has to be a better way." Thomas would shake his head. "Success requires sacrifice. I just need to work harder." The neighbors admired Thomas. "That man works like 3 people," they said, and they weren't wrong. If effort alone created wealth, Thomas would have been unstoppable. But the truth was far less romantic. Despite working twice the hours of everyone else, Thomas's farm barely survived. Every harvest was a struggle. Every season pushed him closer to debt. His crops were average, his yield mediocre. Worst of all, he had no life outside work. No energy, no clarity, no joy. And right next to his farm lived another man, Richard. Same age, same size land. Fewer resources to start with. But something about Richard didn't make sense. Richard worked from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. 6 hours. He used irrigation systems, hired part-time help when needed, spent evenings reading, relaxing, traveling with his family. And somehow, Richard's farm produced twice as much as Thomas's. That fact haunted Thomas. Night after night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the same question. How? Then came the drought, the worst the valley had seen in years. Water became scarce. Every farmer faced the same challenge. How do you keep crops alive with limited resources? Thomas answered the only way he knew how: by working harder. He woke at 3 a.m. instead of 4. He carried buckets from a distant well, 50 trips a day. His muscles screamed. His body begged him to stop, but Thomas pushed through. "Hard work never fails," he repeated like a prayer. Meanwhile, Richard made adjustments. He shifted irrigation times to cooler hours, reduced evaporation, let systems do the heavy lifting. Thomas never noticed. He was too busy bleeding. On the 15th day of this routine, something inside Thomas finally gave out. He was carrying his 40th bucket when his vision blurred. His legs weakened. The bucket slipped from his hands, spilling precious water into the dust. Thomas collapsed between the rows, gasping, heart pounding irregularly, unable to stand. Sarah found him there. Hours later, a doctor delivered the truth Thomas had refused to hear. "Your body is shutting down. You're dehydrated, sleep-deprived, and dangerously close to a heart attack. If you continue like this, you won't see the next harvest. Then the words that landed like a hammer. Not because of the drought, because you won't survive. That night, lying in bed with IV fluids dripping into his arm, Thomas felt something unfamiliar. Defeat. Not defeat from circumstances. Not defeat from bad luck. Defeat from realizing that the belief guiding his entire life might be wrong. I did everything right, Thomas whispered. I worked harder than anyone. Why am I failing? Sarah held his hand. Maybe, she said softly. Hard work isn't the answer. Maybe there's something you haven't learned yet. That sentence stayed with him. 3 days later, still weak but able to walk, Thomas did something pride had stopped him from doing for years. He knocked on Richard's door. Richard welcomed him inside. They sat on the porch overlooking green, thriving fields. Thomas stared at them, the proof of a reality he didn't understand. I need to know, he said. I work twice your hours. You work half the time and produce double the results. How? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up. Come with me. Inside the tool shed, Richard picked up 2 axes, one old and dull, one sharp and gleaming. Imagine 2 woodcutters, Richard said. The first swings his axe for 12 hours straight. No breaks, no rest. He believes effort equals results. Richard handed Thomas the dull axe. Try. Thomas swung. The axe bounced off the log again and again. After 10 swings, Thomas was breathing hard, and the log barely showed a mark. Richard picked up the sharp axe. 1 swing, deep cut, 3 more swings. The log split cleanly in 2. The second woodcutter works fewer hours, Richard said, but he sharpens his axe regularly. Then he looked Thomas in the eyes. You've been swinging a dull axe for years, bleeding, exhausted, wondering why nothing falls. There's a difference, Richard continued, between motion and progress, between being busy and being effective. Richard walked Thomas through his farm. First, he said, systems over effort. I don't carry water in buckets. I built a system that works while I sleep. You spend 6 hours hauling water. My system does the same job in minutes. Second, focus over hustle. I grow 2 crops that thrive here. You grow 5. I master 2. You struggle with many. Third, rest is strategy. When my mind is rested, I make better decisions. You're so exhausted you can't think clearly. Exhaustion makes expensive mistakes. Richard placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. You're not failing because you don't work hard enough. You're failing because hard work is the only tool you know. Hard work without strategy is just suffering. It's time to sharpen your axe. Thomas returned home with something new. Hope. For the first time in years, he didn't rush back to the fields. He sat down with Sarah and a notebook. Teach me to think differently. The next morning, Thomas worked 4 hours, then stopped. He researched irrigation systems, spoke with suppliers, made a plan. Within 2 weeks, he installed a basic system. Water time dropped from 6 hours to 20 minutes. He reduced crops from 5 varieties to 2. He hired help during peak season, but the biggest change wasn't in his farm, it was in his life. He ate dinner with his family. He slept. He thought. And with a clear mind, everything improved. 6 months later, the harvest came. Thomas's fields produced 40% more than his previous best year. Not because he worked harder, because every hour was intentional. He worked 7 hours instead of 15, and produced more. Richard visited and smiled. Now, he said, you're not just a hard worker, you're a smart one. Thomas's story isn't about farming. It's about you. About anyone who believes exhaustion equals commitment. Hard work is necessary, but it's not sufficient. Before you work harder, ask, is there a system that could work smarter? Is there something you should stop doing? Is your axe dull? Here's your challenge. This week, identify one task that drains most of your time. Ask one question. Is there a smarter way? Build one system, make one adjustment. Stop swinging the dull axe, sharpen it. If this story hit home, like the video. Share it with someone who needs permission to work smarter. Comment below, what's one task you'll optimize this week? Subscribe for more stories that transform how you think about success. Because your best work happens when your mind is sharp, not when your body is broken.